Welcome to Alternative Dog Moms Podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, the creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. For the past 9 years, I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I started raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott. For the past 9 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself, and I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned on this journey. As the Alternative Dog Moms, we're bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and sharing the tips, tricks, and resources we learn along the way. Now, let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
And hello, Billy.
Hi. I didn't do the hello things.
I know.
It's okay.
It's like, whatever. Okay, Billy.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I just got to see you the other week, and I had all these notes I was writing during your presentation, like, ask Billy this, ask Billy this. So now I get to ask you all my questions.
Well, thank you for coming. It was a different thing. So somebody called me out on it because they were like, I was at a farm once and heard Charlie from Podega was like, I was at a farm once and I heard you only talk on milk. So apparently I did that one other time on a farm, which I don't remember when this was, but people know I love raw milk, but I've never done a whole presentation just on that one thing. And it was nice to be able to dive into some things I've never covered before too. And just had a really fun time at that event as well.
And Kimberly, when I was going through and editing my rundown of the event, I realized that I did not do a good job summarizing Billy's presentation. All I covered was the things that I learned. Billy actually took us on quite an emotional journey during that presentation too. Like, we laughed, we cried. It was like a very emotional presentation too. And I did not do a good job explaining that last week.
Yeah, I have to stop. One of the things I really wanted to do during that was pay homage to, one of my mentors and best friends, Jacqueline Hill, because milk came from, this whole thing that exists in the industry. So the milk in everything, different types of raw milk, all that comes from her. It came from her, a single farmer and 60 goats. And in the beginning, she said, I'm going to do this thing. And people were like, you can't do that. You're not going to be able to source it. You can't do it. And for her, anytime you told her she can't do something, that's just like, well, prepare for it to actually be done now, because that's her motivation. But I can't do that on stage because I can't get through it. And I'm not a very emotional person. I've been accused of being a robot many, many times. But yeah, I was just like, as soon as I even saw the slide, I was like, oh God, here we go. So.
Yeah, he shared like a throwback picture where he looked very young and he was touching like his arm around Jacqueline, and she was kind of like, don't touch me.
Yeah. Well, okay. Number one, thank you for at one point he looked young. Appreciate that. That's really
I'm just
great.
saying, you look young, noticeably younger, like shaggier.
That made me feel good.
You actually look shaggier is actually the better way to put it.
Yeah, I did have my hair was longer, but yeah, the example I gave from the stage was the only time we ever hugged was when she fell down a flight of stairs and I caught her. Truly, that was the only time we ever hugged, and we meant so much to each other, but it's just not her style. It's not really my style either, but it's definitely not her style. And so yeah, it's always fun to think about her and the impact that she had on the industry. So
I love Jacqueline. She was always so funny. Because of Jacqueline, I drank fermented fish stock one day.
She always said what she was thinking.
Yeah. Oh, wouldn't that be lovely? Just for a day. Just for one day. Before we started recording, I was talking to Erin about SuperZoo because she's coming too. And that's what my mind straight went to. It's like, you can't say what you're thinking because they'll make you leave. It's like,
that's awesome that you guys are both coming. Yeah, we're really looking forward to our whole team will be there. And
awesome.
we have a real company booth, and so it was a big step for us, releasing the food and having that being an actual pet food company now that is available to all size dogs and not, freeze dried is typically smaller dogs or used as a topper or something like that.
Yeah.
There's not many 80-pound dogs doing freeze dried food, that kind of thing. And we're just in a whole different sphere now. And so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm actually going to AFCO right before it. So I have to fly from San Antonio, where AFCO is, to SuperZoo. And because of that, I had like a flex day. Like I couldn't fly all the way back home and then over, again. So I'll be in Vegas for a whole week. So I'll be there Saturday to Saturday. So that's a very long time, probably too long. Um, but it is what it is. I'll try to take advantage of it. And
I'll be there for 2 days.
yeah,
That's my Vegas limit. 3 maybe. 3 maybe. But that's basically it for me. It's just like the noise. It's like when I leave the airport and I no longer have to hear the dinging of the slot machines. It's just like, oh yeah. It's like, it's funny because when you arrive and you start hearing the dinging, it's kind of exciting because it's like, we're here. But then, yeah, you leave and it's just like, okay, yeah, I'm done. But it's for me, it's all the socializing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time you and I were at the Chicago one, the Dogs Naturally
Mm-hmm.
Summit. And I couldn't get out of the space, and you told me to just walk with purpose as you're leaving, and it was so helpful because I would just hide from people when I needed a break from socializing. But now that I learned to walk with purpose, at SuperZoo is too big, nobody knows who the hell I am, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, it's a thing. It's like actually at that conference once. I think it was the last year, but I spoke, and then Richard Patton came up to me and he's like, "Oh, can you sit down with me? I'd like to talk to you, have some questions about your presentation." I was like, "First of all, I'm sitting down with you. You're not sitting down with me. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you have a little bit more experience in this than I
It
do."
was, I remember when I was at the one that I was at where you were at, he came up and we were talking. And when I realized he actually knew my name, I was so floored and just so excited. He probably doesn't know it today, and he probably knew it because he asked somebody who's that person over there. It didn't matter to me. That was like probably the event with the biggest ego boost for me because I kept going up to people and they're like, "Oh, hey, Kimberly." And I'm like, "Oh my God, Dr. Barbara Royal knows who I am. Do you know who she knows? Oprah."
Yeah,
Of
that's
course, now
true.
all these years later, I don't really like Oprah, so it doesn't have the same hit that it used to, but I'll still own it.
Well, hang on. I did want to say the reason why I brought the Richard Patton thing up was
Oh
because we
yeah.
were trying to talk somewhere and people kept coming up. And so I was like, we got to get out of here. So we walked over to there was like a speakers area, with like beverages and whatnot. So we went in there so we could actually sit down and talk. And he looked at me. He's like, everybody wants to be famous until they are. I always remember that. It is hard to get out of those situations.
Yeah, it's always funny to me at those events, the different expos and stuff, like there are people who, man, they just pounce. Like the minute that you come off stage, they're like getting the selfie, and I'm always like, oh, like,
Yeah.
and I'm just trying to get to the ladies' room, and I gotta like weed through all these people.
I don't do selfies anymore, only because I feel like I had 1 year where my SuperZoo trip was just selfies of me with other people, and it felt so icky for me to do that that I
Well, I
wasn't
have the
like.
opposite problem. I go to events and then come home and I'm like, I have 0 pictures of me at this event. I only take pictures of other things. And then I'm
I
like,
will.
I don't even, you can't
I
even
made
tell I
a
was
point.
there.
I only really take pictures of stuff that I'm going to, that I think is cool or I'm going to promote or anything, but no pictures of me. It's just, it, yeah. And plus, I tend to look at old pictures of me and I'm like, oh my God, why did I post this? So now I just don't. I would take a picture today because I'm having a good hair day. So I'm really excited. So
You are having a good hair day. You
we
too,
just
Billy.
went way
No,
off the
thank you.
rails.
I'm having the same hair day I've had for the past 15 years. So
So the big question that I have in my notes about raw milk, and now I can't remember why I wrote this in my notes, but my biggest thing I put ask and all these stars and circled it was ask about lactoferrin.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, lactoferrin, so that was one of the things I want. So it's, how do I start this? This is
What
where
is lactoferrin?
that's a good way to start it. Um, so it's a particular enzyme that essentially assists the body in whatever. So it's unique. That's what I was looking for. It's unique to milk. So it essentially it is an immune system. It's an immune system response. And it's there because baby animals don't have their full immune system yet, or any immune system in some cases. And so lactoferrin is there to stop the growth of pathogens. It's there to stimulate the immune system. It's there to basically create a separate immune system. Your body also creates lactoferrin when you experience trauma. So whether that trauma is, external, say you get a bruise, all that kind of stuff, or like, because they found lactoferrin in kidneys, they found lactoferrin in all these different tissue types. So it's there to essentially create a proper immune response. And so your body can create it, but your body can create a lot of things. And there's also benefit to ingesting those things as well. So your body doesn't have to create those things. And that's essentially only available in two ways: raw milk or milk in general. I mean, I believe there is lactoferrin in pasteurized milk, but obviously it's reduced just like everything else. It's raw milk and it's a supplement that's derived from raw milk, essentially. And so this is where, I wanted to highlight a couple of those things. The other thing I looked at was like glutathione, that are either unique to milk or unique in a certain way to milk. So it's kind of like, how do I differentiate this food as something that you can't find somewhere else? Because people are like, dogs don't need milk. Dogs don't need X. They don't need X. But what does need mean in that particular context?
Mm-hmm.
That particular context is like, well, a dog doesn't need lactoferrin to survive today, but it will give better health outcomes if it does ingest lactoferrin on a regular basis, just generally. So that's kind of like one of the cool evolutionary examples of why milk works so well, is like because it's made to be food by nature.
And I think you had talked about this in the context of the myth about animals don't need to drink the milk of other animals to survive, or other species don't do that.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous. It's saying humans are and they say it in context to humans because that's where you hear this in like nutrition. Humans are the only animals, or are the only animal that drink milk into adulthood. Therefore, it doesn't make any sense to do that. Well, one, that's not a nutrient argument. That's a philosophical argument. And it's actually a bad philosophical argument because it's a logical fallacy. So it's called the appeal to nature logical fallacy, meaning if something happens in nature, it's good. And if, by the way, your argument is based on only a logical fallacy, spoiler, it's not a cohesive argument. You have to pair that with other things. Like you'd have to say, this is what happens in nature, and we see this, this, and this. It has to be part of something else. You can't base your only thing on a logical fallacy. That's the example I gave on stage was humans are the only animal that uses iPhones. Therefore, using iPhones is wrong. That doesn't make any sense. Also, humans are the only animals that garden. Therefore, gardening is wrong nutritionally. So when you break these things down, you're like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And the funny thing is, and I just, I said this on stage, but I do laugh a little bit when people say that to me, like I've never heard it before. I'm like, oh my God, I've never thought of that argument before. That's so wild. So yeah, it's kind of like, it goes back to the vet thing too, when vets say dogs and cats can't digest milk. Well, that's ridiculous because we know that dogs have lived off of just raw milk. And how on earth were they living if they can't digest any of it? So I did want to go through and like break down some of those like myths, and actually it was funny because there was a woman, I hope to God she doesn't listen to this, and she's like, she didn't remember my name, but I'm pretty sure it's Natalie. And she was talking to me about that. She's quite the homesteader and whatnot, and she was talking to me about when she was first introduced into raw milk, and she said all those 5 arguments you put up there was what I used to say before I like thought through these things or learned a little bit more about it. So I kind of wanted to be like, we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting the species appropriate argument, where I feel like that's where we started when we were trying to understand why we would feed our dogs fresh food. But when we break it down to ingredients, and people will say, well, I would never feed that because it's not species appropriate. And I used to tell myself that, what would my dog eat in nature? My dog would not go out and crack open oysters and eat those naturally. So I shouldn't be adding oysters to their meal. But it's just sort of like, my dog is my pet. And, there's a lot of things that I'm feeding my dogs that they wouldn't get in nature. But I happen to have someone that emptied their freezer full of squid, and I could dehydrate it and make treats, and the dogs love them. So there you go. That's what they're going to get. But it's just like it can make your head spin when you go down that rabbit hole of what is right and what isn't right. And I had to pivot into, what do my dogs need right now, rather than what would they naturally eat on their own.
Yeah. And one way to look at that too is to say like, okay, well, even if you go back to the natural sense of it, right? We know, for instance, that there is a wolf pack that lives on the Olympic Peninsula that survives mostly on fish and fish products. Okay, well, those fish that they're eating have a very similar nutrition profile to those oysters that you are giving. So what's to say that that's not natural? And also, going back to my earlier point, like the point is not to go back to this is a this is the best dog or cat's diet. One, that statement is not true, because we learn more. We always learn more about what's better, what's more appropriate. I'm not trying to just go back to a wolf's diet. I'm trying to do better than that. I'm always trying to push and do better. And how do we get better health outcomes? I know for a fact that there are no wolf packs or wild dog packs that are wild fermenting mushrooms and making them into a probiotic drink. But the feedback we've been getting on that product, and particularly the most interesting one, which we've gotten from a handful of people separately, is that their tear stains for their dogs like disappeared when they started using it. That health outcome for that dog is better. And that is something that you could argue that product is nature, because we're bringing those probiotics from nature. They're soil-based probiotics, and they were what they'd get in the wild. But the delivery system is totally unnatural, right? If you're going on the premise of what they'd eat in the wild. But that dog now has a better health outcome because they have a better bacterial balance in their body, which you can actually see, versus not doing that product. So it's really about what you're talking about, Kimberly. What works for my dog? What's results based? How do I make my animal the healthiest? And you know that better than anyone else.
So, oh my gosh, I have so many things I want to, because you just touched on like 5 different bullet points I had written down. So with the raw milk, I feel like there are times in the past, maybe when you worked at other places, that we used to occasionally hear about doing an all raw milk diet if a dog had certain health issues like inflammatory bowel disease or things like that. And I feel like I hadn't heard that in a while. And it was funny because I attended that Williamsburg event with my friend Kate, who owns the pet food store where I buy all your products from. And
Thank you.
We had been talking about, we haven't heard anything about the raw milk diet. We had no idea that was what you were going to talk about that day. So do you still recommend that? Are there certain health situations where doing an all raw milk diet is very helpful?
Yeah, I mean, either all or half, or a great example of that is animals with kidney and liver issues. Whether it's elevated in liver enzymes or kidney failure to just general kidney issues. I have found that doing at least half the diet in milk makes a huge difference. And you can see it for yourself. I mean, if you have a dog that consistently has elevated liver enzymes, just try it. Just try it for a month and then retest, and you will see those values come down. Because, I mean, truly, like I was kind of talking about on stage, I wish that I could incorporate just more straight up milk into my dog's diet. It's not what works for him exactly. And, as I mentioned, I have to do this convoluted raw Greek yogurt that takes me two days to make, which I do for him because he's our guy, he's our guard dog, etc. So ideally, I would like to do more, and the way that I want people to think about it is it's what all of us are trying to do but aren't as good at. Meaning, all of us who formulate foods, doesn't matter who you are, we haven't figured out how to make something, because when we formulate foods, our food is complete and balanced to AFCO standards. That's just a certain basic set of standards. We're not talking about the thousands of nutrients that exist, tens of the untold amount, because we don't even know what they are, but the untold amount in milk itself. So we just don't have the, science to be able to do that. And so over the years, I've seen so much benefit to doing all or some, or even once a week, one day entirely, or even for a month as like a reset, something like that. And by the way, that came from human medicine. That's where that comes from. It wasn't just like an idea of like, oh, we'll just do this for dogs. It actually comes from a doctor that worked at the Mayo Clinic, I think back in the 1920s, who would use that as his treatment for a lot of issues, diabetes, or there's a bunch of things he used it for, and had great success with it.
And that was raw
Just
milk he was using with
Yeah.
people?
And just so happens that raw milk, is not as profitable as medicine. So I don't think it went anywhere from a research standpoint, but there is some interesting stuff you can look up on that. And that was the original premise for, you applying that to dogs. And obviously over the years, we've known that has worked.
We know what I'll be Googling today.
Yeah.
So you touched on Huckleberry, and I wanted to talk about that more because I wanted to know, like, what was your process for determining what his best diet was? Like, what was your evaluation criteria for deciding like, oh, he's not thriving with all this goat milk? How did you determine like what to try next? What were you looking for as an improvement? What was your whole process for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question because, obviously I feed him so much differently than I fed Lua, or, that I would feed another dog, because every dog and that's the other point that I, try to make people, is like every dog is so different. It's as different as people. And we all know the wide variety of diets for that people thrive on or don't thrive on, right? So the way that I typically start that process is I figure out the base number of calories I'm shooting for. With him, it's 250 calories roughly per meal. And then I figure what are the base, and then I figure out, okay, of those calories, I really, I'm pretty simple. You may know this from the way that I speak about food, but I don't really use very many supplements. I don't do, it's all, basic food stuff. And I do rotate between, certain things in our food and that kind of thing. But I try to like exemplify what nature brings, and then I supplement if I have to. But even that I do through food. Like a supplement that I give right now is I make homemade mushroom broth. And that is actually a huge part of his allergy protocol, because we basically fixed his allergies from there's a couple of factors to that. But I'd rather do that and make something myself and see it in its actual form. It also helps that that's my hobby outside of my job, making dog products, is making dog products for my own dog. So I'm a huge dork. So basically, what I wanted to find out was, obviously in using our food as the base of whatever diet that's going to be. But within that 250 calories, I just take the most nutrient dense foods I possibly can and make up a particular percentage. So his percentage right now is 58. Okay, so this is like, it'll change, but if it's just like his base thing, like generally what I do, it's 58% our food, right? And the rest of that diet is made up of an egg yolk and raw Greek yogurt. And I truly consider that egg yolk and that raw Greek yogurt to be as complete as the food. So I'm bringing those together, and then I can add my, so that's the calorie base. And then, as you know, like Just Greens, Bailey's blend, which I consider to be, way more important than I ever thought as far as what they bring. Previous to working at Green JuJu, those are all, I don't really count those in the calories because they're, your dog's not going to become overweight from eating too many Just Greens, right? Because it's so low in carbs and high in fiber. So then I can just add kind of whatever I want on top of that. And that might change, if I get out the can of sardines and I do two of those, that'll replace either the egg or the thing, or the yogurt, and here's the other thing too. For me, it's also about convenience and also how my brain works. So I have OCD, like real OCD, and like there are certain things I can do or I can't do. I can't use tinctures, for example, because one of my triggers is closing lids. I have trouble with all lids, but I can't do that on a consistent basis because I will get stuck, and that's really annoying. So I do sort of so I work within what I can do, right? And so there's great mushroom products that come in tinctures, right? But they're not available to me. And so I need to find something else. That's one of those things. It's actually funny. I was talking to Rob Silver at the thing, and I thanked him. I was like, I really appreciate it because I was like, for myself, I take your Five Defenders when I'm on the road and at home because I I need it to be in a pill. That's the form I can take it in. And this is the one that I found that I can actually do that in. So, I think that it takes all kinds when it comes to feeding our dogs, but it's like, how do we you know, factor that into that? So that's kind of, hopefully that answered your question. Like that's how I basically take the number of calories and then I know how many calories each thing I want to feed is and just kind of, the other thing I want to say was the reason why it comes out to be about 58% in the food is because that's half of one patty. So I cut the patty in half and our food is in patties. And so like I have trouble being like, I'm going to cut it into 8 different pieces and do 5 ounces of this. So I just straight cut that thing in half and then put it in the bowl and cut it up or mash it up. And then I can just basically pull out a patty every day and use half in the morning and half at night. So
nice.
So what are other combinations that you tried with Huckleberry that made you be like, oh, he doesn't do as well on these? Like, did things make his allergies flare up? Or like, because you had showed two bowls, like one was like almost all goat milk and eggs, and you're like, I know this is a complete meal, but he doesn't do as well on that as he does on the meal that has the patty and the ratios that you just very accurately described. And so, like, how did you know to like try something different for him?
Well, yeah, I mean, every bit of me is screaming like, no, just do eggs and milk. There's no calories wasted. There's just, to me, if I was doing that and adding the Just Greens, if your dog can do that, like what an amazing thing. And I think for like longevity, like imagine doing that for 5 years and seeing like what the results you get are. I just think it'd be incredible. And then you go to My Ungrateful Dog and you go like, oh, you're not. So one of the things I learned was I tend to be someone who, one, when we formulate products, we do it very simply. We do it with very few ingredients, right? Like with the mushrooms, like you could the mushroom probiotic. We're basically taking the complexity of nature in like 3 very basic ingredients versus being like, hey, we did this mushroom probiotic and we added a bunch of herbs to it, right? So we wanted that one complex. It's very simple in its complexity, if that makes sense. So with Huckleberry, it was like, he also showed me, I tend to be a feeder who's like, oh, this thing's really healthy. I'm going to do a bunch of it. Right. Like that's how my brain works in that sense as well. So like egg yolks, I eat a lot of egg yolks. Egg yolks are like, or just the whole egg, whatever want to do for your pet. Like they're just insanely complete foods, or it's an insanely complete food. And so with him, I tried doing, say, up to, instead of when I didn't do raw yogurt, I did his food and I did 2 egg yolks. Right. So that's 4 egg yolks. He's a 28-pound dog. That's a pretty good amount of egg yolks in a day. Right. And he showed me very quickly through his digestion that it was not optimal. And I think that's because of he is better on a more moderate fat to protein to fat ratio. With the raw dairy, I just straight up milk. I notice instantly that his digestion is not 100%. And the more I do that milk over time, it becomes more and more not ideal, as well as like having gas, things like that. And so I tried every dairy that you can do. I tried the yogurt I make, for our family culture, just straight up, because like the yogurt that I have every day is drinkable. Like, because raw yogurt's never going to be as thick as uh, yogurt that you heat up or buy at the grocery store. I tried lactose free. I tried regular milk. I tried, different types of fermentation. And then I just happened to try the raw, because I make for Emily as well, the raw Greek yogurt, which is just straining out the liquid. So you'll have raw whey, which is nice because I drink that, but which is really good for your immune system. But you'll have the raw whey, but it's also not raw Greek yogurt, or Greek yogurt has more protein in it because you're just taking the moisture out, right? It has more nutrients just per, gram or whatever. And I actually called Roxanne and I was like, hey, this is weird, because I tell her weird stuff like this all the time because, we just like to talk nutrition. I was like, so Huckleberry can only do raw Greek yogurt. And she's like, there's no reason is, there is no scientific reason that that's the case. And I was like, I agree. But I do know when I do this raw Greek yogurt, he does incredible on it. And so I'm going to go through the process of doing this. And so I think it's just seeing your own dog. And then for the allergies, what works for him is a combination of the mushroom broth that I make, green JuJu veggie blends, doing a lot of just greens bay leaves blend. And then I make, those are really the two crux ones, but then it also helps. I make like gummies, like nettle tea gummies, make a lot of tea type gummies, just steep tea and then add your gelatin to it, make them into gummies. I think that helps as well. But it was kind of a process of elimination, because the first year he had to wear a cone. I mean, he had real allergies, and I was like, this cannot be my dog. Come on now. But he still licks his foot and stuff, but the occasional foot lick is night and day from, what he was. So that's kind of how I went about that.
So you were looking at a lot of poop?
No, I do. That's definitely part of it. Like I can see like where he is optimally.
Do you why don't you feed the egg white?
Sorry, I'm also blurry. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but my camera's so there's a couple things on it. There's nothing wrong with feeding the egg white. I don't think, obviously for, 15 years, people have been talking about Avidin and binding biotin, and then the response is, well, there's enough biotin in the yolk to make up for that. For me, it's probably just comes down to the yolk is the part of the egg that matters for the most part. There is something really cool about egg whites that I'll say in a second, but it's where basically all the vitamins and minerals are. It's where all the healthy fat is, right? It's just, it's aside from our food, which is like basically like a moderate but good amount of vitamin D. Like it hits the vitamin D requirement, but it's not like off the charts or anything like that. So his other vitamin D source is these yolks, just generally, and then the milk, but the yolks especially when you do like, pasteurized eggs. Some of that also just comes from the way I eat. right? When I eat those things, it's easier for me to separate them in my hand and just swallow it, drink the raw yogurt or the raw milk. Um, so that's probably, and then the other thing is this, uh, if you take out the white, egg yolks are a 3-to-1 calcium to phosphorus ratio, which is not exactly 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, but what it means is you probably don't have to account for that. So if you feed eggs every day, you would probably want to balance that out with some kind of calcium, right, over time. But if I'm just feeding the yolk and then all my other stuff's a 1-to-1, I really don't care. Like it's not really going to make that big of a difference. So that's also part of it. Like I don't want to have to go and buy like a calcium supplement and put that in there or and also the eggs I buy are local, but they are also commercial, so it's not like a really a feeding the shell kind of situation. And so, it's nutrition, but it's also just like personal preference too. And they look more beautiful in pictures. So that's what really matters.
I'm making bone broth or mushroom broth right now. It's actually cooling so that I can
nice.
transfer. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I didn't know you made food for your dog, Kimberly. What are you talking about?
I know, right? It's just a fake. I just fake people out for the attention.
Yeah. Can I tell you guys my favorite slide from that was not mine at the conference? So this is going to be like somewhat controversial, but that's okay. Because we just like to talk about science and I think this is an interesting way to put this. So I really enjoyed when Karen and Rodney were talking about, different types of food processing. So like what processing does your food go? Is it homemade? Is it a commercial raw? Is it gently cooked? Is it freeze dried? Is it, all of those things? And one of the things that we've really been trying to sort of, talk about over the past, well, since our freeze-dried food came out, we made the commitment to do that. One of the things I've been talking a lot about is HPP and what is the science behind HPP and how that works. And it was the way I've been sort of describing this as a very benign process. So in that it doesn't affect the food, the overall nutrient property very much at all, in the same way as other processing techniques. And so she had a really good slide that was like, here are some minor processing techniques, is I think how she put it. And it was interesting because it said like HPP, it also said freezing, it also said fermentation, it also said, there's all these different ways of doing it. And for me, I've been trying to teach to that and saying like, this is a weird thing to draw the line on versus freezing. Like you could go ahead and you could go find studies right now that will show you that when you freeze food, the ice crystals expand and they break the cell walls, right? And you could say like raw feeding is only non-frozen food. That's it, right? And so that to me was a nice, like the industry is coming around to that a little bit more. Whether or not you want to do it or not is totally fine. Like, there's always going to be, options for both sides of that argument. But it was nice to see that from someone else, especially, obviously someone like that in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because Kimberly and I had pondered this before because we don't know enough, I guess, about HPP, but I guess, are there different methods of HPP, and are there methods that would affect the nutrients more or less? Or I guess we just don't know enough about that process and like how that's actually done.
Yeah, there are definitely different methods within the industry itself. Like, okay, within pet food, I would say that there's probably less variation. There is variation, but there's probably less variation. The variation you see commonly is for other industries. And that's where you kind of muddy the waters between some of the information that's out there and some of the information that quite honestly came from myself. So, I'm complicit in arguing with myself from 10 years ago. So like a good example of that would be there's a study that shows that HPP can oxidize fats. Now, that study was actually done, and HPP was applied for what they found was that the fats were oxidizing after 20 minutes of HPP. So that study is not relevant to pet food because like ours is done for 180 seconds. And so you have to kind of like discern those types of things. But also, I think it's interesting too to get into, a race to be like who can do the most pure thing. It's like we're all trying to do our best when it comes to, say, producing the best products we can. But let's not forget that in the end, the most important thing is health outcomes. That's why we need these. That's why we need different foods and different processing styles and those sorts of things. Because I'm not convinced that every dog will do their best on green JuJu's food, right? And I think it's interesting to, I guess, put it in those terms. But yeah, so you basically, shout out to Steve's Real Food they're the only ones actually doing research on raw pet food. And and you could say to yourself, well, that's biased information because it's from a company, and that may be true, but I got a spoiler. Pretty much all scientific information is biased in some sense, unfortunately. So, but, in meeting with Nicole, the owner there, just being able to look at that data, it's like, oh, this is actual, whether or not there's a couple other information sources where they did it on raw pet food, but looking at their data is the best set of information you can possibly have. And then, well, the other interesting thing I think I've seen kind of like, because people send me articles and stuff like that. So, I definitely read the stuff that's out there. And the other interesting thing is we now have two studies or two information sets from two different companies, neither of which is green JuJu, actually, that show an increase in nutrients after the HPP process is done. So we have one that Steve's did, and then another one, I think it was Texas Tribe, but after they started doing that. So and nobody knows why. I'm not here to tell you like, this is exactly why that you have more nutrients, but to assume that you can't is just not science, right? And so I think that that's a very interesting thing. So I think it's kind of all over the place, I go off on tangents. That was a very tangenty answer. So I apologize for that. I just know that I can talk like real nutrition with you guys. So,
I don't know. It's funny because I think HPP has always been a hot topic. I wouldn't say, I would say a lukewarm topic in the raw feeding space. I love where people like to talk about like what's real fresh food. And if it's processed, it's not real, where everything we do is processed in some way. My only issue with HPP is just a simple personal issue and has nothing to do with science or anything. I just don't like the way it looks. And I'm used to making my own food. And so whenever I buy food, I usually buy food that looks like the food that I'm making. But even then, I rarely buy commercial raw. I just make it. So I feel like I don't really have a space in this conversation. But my cat, on the other hand, does eat food that's HPP because he has freeze dried, and the brands that he likes are, green JuJu. And I don't know if Quest is HPP or not. It's Steve's, but that's what he likes. He likes the Quest pork and he likes the green JuJu rabbit. And I have learned not to tangle with his taste buds. And so that's what he eats. And he is 18 years old, going on 19, and he's doing fantastic. So.
And that's what I mean about the health outcomes. It's like what actually works best for your animal. The color thing is interesting because we've been getting this. We've been meaning to do a video on it because we get the question a lot. So there's two parts to that. The first one comes from there is discoloration, obviously, from HPP. The level of that depends on the amount of pressure and the time of pressure. So when I went to the HPP conference kind of workshop at the University of Nebraska, they actually had like liver laid out, and they had like this amount of pressure for this amount of time, and they kind of went through and did that. And here's the interesting thing. And if you can reference this on video for, if you look at like, we've posted production videos and you can see that the color is different in the actual facility. Mm-hmm. So the discoloration of our product actually comes more from the double grind than it does from the HPP. So what we do is we grind all of the ingredients, they're HPP'd, and then we grind it again. Oh. So it's really just about it's more about, some of that's HPP. It's more about exposing it to air twice. Yeah. Essentially. And so that does have less of obviously that doesn't affect the nutrition very much, but I do understand where you're coming from, like on the eye test part of it. Yeah. But it is more, more about the double grind than it is, but it can definitely be, something for people to get used to for sure.
Yeah. I have a bag of rabbit in the freezer. My dogs don't turn it away, so they don't have a problem with it. So it's like,
well, clearly your cat and dogs are very smart. So
apparently, apparently,
I got to tell you, I appreciate that. My daughter's school tuition is due this month, and so just genuinely appreciate your business.
So a moment ago, you said something like that. That green JuJu food wouldn't be the best choice for every animal. What makes you say that? Is it because it's more organ heavy?
No, just because different formulations work for different animals. And our sense is, we've had amazing results with it being, this new concept of all or mostly organs. Having had the food on the market for the freeze-dried food for, going on a year and a half and getting data back from that. We're also doing some secret data gathering right now that you guys will hear about later, which I think will be really interesting on the frozen food, and getting results with that. So that has been really good, but it's just every dog needs a different fat to protein ratio, for example. Every dog needs, is better with, this amount of vegetation or not having this amount of vegetation. So we did our very best to have a mix of that. So like if you look at our food, you can do a ketogenic diet with our food. If you do the lamb, it's a 1 to 2.7 fat to protein ratio by calories. All of the other ones fit in a 1-to-1 ratio by calories, fat to protein. And so I just mean that in a very, very general sense. You can make the healthiest food on the planet and it might not work for that dog. So, oh God, one other, this is like, I'm so excited about this. And I think it's like totally nerdy. So I was looking back at this study that I have known about, but I sort of put it in a different context. So it's a study that looked at like a meta-analysis of a couple different things. So like wolf diets. So they studied like wolf diets based on, they actually like looked in their poop, and it was like, what is the calorie breakdown of fat to protein? So that was the first part. And it's basically 1-to-1. So that's actually that's actually what I would call a normal moderate fat diet. So what I mean by that is like a lot of the 1-to-1s you see are 1-to-1 by weight, meaning you're going to get, if you have 10 grams of fat, 10 grams of protein, you're getting double the amount of calories from fat. Wolves are choosing really a 1-to-1 by calories. Okay. So that's the first thing you start with, which is pretty close to what our diet is anyway. But there was a second thing that they were looking at, which was dog self-selection studies. So a few really interesting things about that. So number one, the dogs actually, their first day, picked a much higher fat ration, which was 60% fat calories, 30% protein, very low carbohydrates. But over time, as they knew they were getting food every day, they chose higher protein and less fat. Oh. So they reduced the fat percentage. But here's the cool thing. If you take the wolf diet and you take the highest percentage that was of fat that was chosen by the dogs, and you average those together, it's exactly our diet. Just 1 percentage point off from the beef.
Nice.
And I didn't do that on purpose. So
well done.
That's the thing. Like I essentially, we just went off the natural ratios of what the organs are, which is really like a prey ratio, right? Because so whatever you see like on our GAs, for example, like for the fat to protein, that's not an estimate. That's just we just tested it and that was what we found. So I just think like it's an interesting look at what is the health implication potentially of higher fat diets over time. What would they choose or what is the health implication? And then B, it was kind of validating in that we kind of, it was kind of like natural validation of the fat to proteins that we got in the formulation. So,
Yeah, we've actually talked about that study before, Kimberly, the one that said that they would go for a higher fat content, but I don't think we knew the part about how over time that they would change that. That's really interesting.
So when it comes to, going back to that study, where does the fat primarily come from?
I don't know what they used in that study because if they're doing a self-selection study, they're just putting those ingredients out. So I'm guessing it was like that would be a good. We're actually going to be doing some more stuff with those studies, so that's a good like thing to mental note to put in and be like, oh, what was the actual breakdown? But I'm guessing they used just some straight fat source. So probably because it's obviously not like mixed.
Yeah.
Like it's not like they're eating a piece of meat that has a bunch of fat on it. It was obviously like fat and probably like really lean meat and something like that. And that is actually what those ratios are in nature as well. So like if you find, if you look at like the average prey animal, they're going to have like a 5-to-1 omega-3 to 6 ratio, and they're going to basically be like, what I call the lower end of what you're looking for, which is what we are, which is like that 1-to-1 by calories. And that's the other thing too, is like, you can speak to say nutrient density or like feeding less over time, and that's well and good. But we formulated this food. In this food, our goat has say 39 calories, right? Like all of ours, you can basically feed like 36, 39, like in that same range. And then the lamb is much higher. The rabbit is only slightly less. So you can, it's a couple calories so you can feed it. But if we were to formulate that, if we were to take our formula and go, how do we make this so people can feed less of it and save money? We would just be adding fat to it. Yeah. And so for my thinking is I don't want to do that just to do that. I want to make the best possible food and then make it affordable. And we are, because, if you compare us to, brands that have similar amount of calories and that kind of thing, like we're right there price point wise. But I don't even know if that was your question or remember your question. So here we go again on A, I give 20-minute answers, and then B, I go off.
I do think it's interesting when we talk about the cost of food, and you also have to ask yourself, well, how nutrient dense is the food? Because, it's the same thing with solutions, where looking at it at the price point on its own, it's ridiculous. It's like, I'm not going to spend $7, $8 a pound for dog food. But I actually, followed the instructions of how much to feed to my dogs and put that into a bowl. And I was feeding half of what I would feed of my own food. And so it was just sort of like, okay, so we can't just always look at the price point, and it's unfortunate that, there aren't more foods out there that are like the green JuJu and solutions that are so nutrient dense, because I think that, it would help a lot more people switch over to raw if they knew that if I buy this case of food, this is going to last me a lot longer. And so, it would, I don't know, it's a conversation that I think we need to have more of, because even I, in my, infinite wisdom on raw feeding, was, I'm always tripped up by the cost of commercial raw and forget about looking at the serving amounts and what it needs, what our dogs need.
Yeah, and I think the other thing for people to consider too, and that on that point is like there's definitely a difference between, say, calorie density and nutrient density. Like,
Mhm.
I would almost argue like if there's more nutrients coming out of a less amount of calories, that would be more like nutrient density by definition. Wherein like, so if your dog, like the idea is that your dog will maintain weight on X amount of calories. So if you make those calories more calorically dense, you'll feed less. But the idea that you make a food to feed less is a different premise than
Mhm.
how to make the healthiest food, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like it's wherever you find it, and it just goes back to what I was saying too before, like different foods work for different animals and different households, that kind of thing. Like I was just emailing with someone who was asking about like the price breakdown of our food, and I went through and showed them like, here's how much it'll cost you a month if you do 3 pound bags, 6 pound bags, or the 18 pound bulk box. And the 18 pound bulk box offered considerable savings.
Yeah.
Her total was like 338 or something like that for the with the bulk box, and it was like over $100 less. It was like $150 less than if she did the 3 pound bags.
Huh.
So, that as that stuff matters, like buying in bulk. And so that's one of the reasons why when we put out the food, we were like, we need the most convenient form because that's what people want. And then we need to do bulk boxes right away.
Yeah.
Because, for those people that, in especially this camp of people who are sitting here, not even just the wider general public, but, those people who are like raw feeders, they want bulk boxes immediately. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have an order in for a pork bulk box now because Nessie did really well when I tried her on the green JuJu pork. So
well,
And
thank you
that's
very much. Yeah.
yeah, that's what it's good for. I mean, I always look at it as you get the 3 pound bag for either if I'm going out of town and someone else needs to feed my dog and I don't want them to have to be bothered, here you go.
Mhm.
Or just to try it out with my dogs to make sure, are you guys going to eat this? I'm lucky. I don't have picky dogs. So it's not like if I go and buy the bulk, Rodrigo was like that, where I had to really be careful about stocking up on foods because he'll like it for a hot second. And then I go and buy a case of it and he's like, nope, I don't eat that anymore. And it's just like, but now with these, trash pandas, they'll pretty much eat anything that I put in front of them. So yeah, bulking is ideal. And you recently had a sale. Was it last? It wasn't the last Wild Wednesday up here, but it was the one before is when I couldn't find the mushroom broth. We had a Wild Wednesday, which at the pet store is 20% off of all fresh food. And then Green Juju had an additional sale, and I don't remember what the percentage was, but an additional sale on top of that. The store opens at 10. I arrived at 10:45 and most of Green Juju was gone. It was just like a line of people with Green Juju in their carts. And I was just like,
It's funny. I don't even know if we're doing a percentage sale. I don't even know what it was, but I do know we did offer for this month. It's still going, obviously, but we did offer if you buy a 3 or 6 pound bag of food, you get a free pint of milk. If the store does Astro.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah, so that was that's the kind of sale I love because then it puts that something into someone's hands that they might not have used
Yeah.
before, and something that can be very important because somebody might just be like adding some raw into their pet's diet and they're like, oh, well, this milk is really easy to do, so I'll just,
Mhm.
continue to do this. And that's at the end of the day, that's the best customer. No offense to, you guys, but my favorite customer is the person who feeds kibble and just does one thing. Like if we can
Yeah.
get them to do that one thing to make their animal healthier, like that's amazing. Like it's if only that would work on my family, but here we are. So
Oh, that's whenever I do we have 3 Walmarts here. I don't know why, but we do. Our town is not so big that we need 3 Walmarts, but we do.
that's
I guess
crazy.
they just don't want people to have to drive far. And they're big ones. It's not like we have a little Walmart and then a super Walmart. No, we have 3 super Walmarts. I think they're big to me. There's 2 entrances, so I think
Wow.
that they're super Walmarts. So every few months I go to each Walmart, and it takes an hour to go to each Walmart, find someone with a ladder to come and get all the oysters down for me. Mm-hmm. And while they're getting the oysters, I get the canned sardines, no salt added. And eventually when people assume that when I say I just want all the oysters, I just want like 3 cans. And I'm like, no, everything on the shelf I would like. And so this always starts a conversation of what are you doing with all of these oysters? And so I would love to have Billy with me one day and just have you go on a scientific discussion.
I'm sure they would love that. Yes.
I know.
I had that was kind of funny because my camera went into focus and then yours went out. So maybe we're like connected cosmically. So Kelly and I were once at dinner and we were sitting at the bar at this Mexican restaurant, we're eating, and I was like talking about it. I was like, oh, I have this organic chocolate bar. But I was like, but don't worry, like I'm drinking kombucha, which is really high in acidic acid, and that's going to make sure my blood sugar does. And I went in this whole thing, and she's like, I know that people really like this about you, but can you shut up? So I was like, yeah, you do have to hear this a lot. So yes. And Emily feels exactly the same way. She's like, I get it. Okay. She's like,
well,
I live
only
with you.
Run into you a few times a year when you're in town. So I don't get the overdose of it. And I'm pretty good at tuning people out as well. So
yeah. Well,
I mean, my only thing is, I guess our annoyance, but it's not an annoyance. I just think it's funny is you taking pictures of food and then me taking pictures of you taking pictures of food, because it's just funny to me that you do this.
Yeah. Well, most of the time I take them for Emily because I travel a lot. But in the summertime, if the light hits just right, I do, put those on Instagram. And I do a lot of meals alone on the road. And so, you got to do something, I guess, during those times. That's why, when it comes like SuperZoo and stuff, I look forward to, and it kind of blows my mind that there's like a team. Because you remember I used to just walk around.
Yeah.
And now actually having, the booth and getting to, it's honestly been, I've been with Green JuJu 3 years. So it was 3 years in June. And it's honestly just been amazing to be able to contribute to Kelly's vision and to be able to truly like see what we could make together. And now with the whole team and, we got a national sales guy and, I have a sales territory. I'm a sales rep. I'm just throwing that out there. So, and, having the team there is pretty cool. So
I think it's funny how much I use your products in what I do. Like with my bone broth, I've been doing it all week of making bone broth. And I have one plain batch of bone broth. I have one batch that has mushrooms, and then I have one batch that uses your Lewis Golden paste.
Interesting.
And then I just throw that in there at the last step. And so same thing when I do, because I do use Just Greens and Bailey's Blend, but I also have my garden. So as I'm harvesting my gardens, I grind up all the vegetables for my dogs, and I put the beets into my vegetable blend. Sometimes I put the golden paste into the vegetable blend and just shake it up, and it just makes it easier so I don't have to deal with it later. But I use all of these things. The same thing with the milk. I use the milk on modified fasting days, or when I just don't feel like feeding the dogs for whatever reason. I'm just running around. And so I pour everybody some milk and stuff. But it's just like one of those where I don't even really think about it. My dogs, well, 2 of the dogs like the mushrooms. Zoe was not. She would eat it if it was in her food, but I feel like she would eat anything that's in her food. But on its own, she walked out of the room. I let her smell it, and she just walked out of the room offended. So she was not a fan, which surprised me. I love mushrooms. So I ended up drinking half of it. I didn't.
It's very good for you.
I did. Well, I didn't notice a shinier coat or or anything like that. I didn't notice any magical changes within my physique. But I I did drink it.
Well, it's such an interesting, we found the palatability generally to be really high. And obviously most people are mixing it with food anyways. It's just the whole concept of that product is to create a base of diversity, because every dog and cat needs, I think, Kimberly, your dogs do a better job of almost any dogs I've ever seen getting outside and in the woods and all that every day, essentially. Most dogs and cats don't have that. And so bringing that environment into their food via those soil-based probiotics and having the fact that, those probiotics depend on the soil, the mushroom, what animals are on John's farm when he's fermenting them, what season it is, because what wild yeast is going to be in the air. There's all these different factors. So for me, it was like, yes, this will help with things like diarrhea and, gut issues and that kind of thing. But every dog and cat deserves this base of diversity generally in their microbiome. And that's kind of being that every bottle's different, like because you get that different fermentation. Having that sort of like base of diversity is kind of like that's how we do probiotics. If it's Bam's Beats, if those fermented gold paste, they're all wild fermented. So, the beets are going to be different because they're in the soil and it's going to be different soil. And plus, I like that you use the beets because then you don't have to go about, fermenting them yourself. And
oh, I hate fermenting. I went through a period, and it was probably back when I first met you, where I was all about fermentation. And then one day I was just like, I have all the gear in my garage. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's a lot, but I have these little lids that make it easier.
Yeah.
And I didn't buy a bunch of jars, but I went on Craigslist and people who were just like, get rid of these jars. And so Johan one day came home with cases full of jars. And I was like, I'm doing this. And today, no.
It's an acquired taste. I do a lot.
Same thing with kombucha. I keep saying that I'm going to start making no, it's at the store.
Yeah, so. I get that. I mean, I obviously make my own, but which actually that's a mental check because I have to restart. I was traveling, so I went too long, so I have to restart the batch. But my Scobie's been kicking it since 2016. You've met her before, so
yes, I have. Yes, I have. I keep saying all these things. I'm just not. I figure I'm going to stay in my lane, and my lane does not include. I am a bone broth champion. And I can mix up a mean batch of dog food. And that is as long as I'm using a base mix. And that is where my strengths are. And that is where I feel proud. And I can grind up some vegetables. I have a wonderful food processor that does a great job. And I'm really good at gardening. So.
Well, as long as I'm terrible at gardening. So.
You should try container gardening. It's a lot easier. Mm-hmm. So I'm very good at that. So that is as much as I can deal with, and I'm okay. Yeah. If I started making kombucha, I would probably either fail miserably or I would just completely lose track of it. That's what happened when I had an in-ground garden. I started really great, and then finally Johan was like, so are we not gardening anymore? I just forgot about it and went out. It was overrun with weeds and it's just not my thing.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, for those listening that would like to pursue it, it's, I do 1.5 gallons a week and it takes me roughly a half an hour. So you can get into like a rhythm with it. And it's, and the nice thing is if you go somewhere and you're not able to do it and it just goes too long because kombucha turns into vinegar, right? If you just leave it long enough, you can always just restart it. And you're gonna get those same culture sets. So check it out.
So, I was realizing it was 2 years ago that we had you on. You were the very first guest we ever had on this podcast. And there has been so many products that have come out. I think you guys were just launching the beets and the golden paste when we first talked to you. And of course, now you have the whole line of food and all the other things. Is there anything you can tease for us that's being worked on or coming down the pike?
No, I can't. We're always working on stuff. And I will tell you, some of that stuff happens. Some of that stuff doesn't work. I fail at things because I have like, oh, it's like such a cool idea and it just doesn't work. Sometimes we make something really cool and it's way too expensive. And it's just not like what a lot of people don't realize is like you can make cool stuff at home and not all that translates to commercial sale.
Right.
And that happens a lot because it's me and I just like to make wacky things in my kitchen. That's where most of the R&D is done.
Don't
Um,
you feel like we need like a blog or like a video of this, Kimberly, of like Billy's
Yes.
fails,
Yes.
we had one that exploded well, I opened it and it exploded in my kitchen at midnight and got all over our curtains. And Emily was so pissed off. But on the flip side, I was like, this is where the money comes from. So I don't know what you want from me. Um, but so the only thing I can tell you is we are working on things and those things are really cool and interesting. But that's all I can give you. So, unfortunately, because I would love to be able to always talk about those things, but there's a lot that goes into that. So,
Well, are there any launches on the horizon?
no comment.
Okay.
Is there an announcement at SuperZoo? Will there be an announcement at SuperZoo?
There's no announcement at SuperZoo. SuperZoo is we are in support of our food, having just released that. We announced that at Global, and then that was in the spring, and then it didn't come out for a month or so. Just because of how that works, shipping and stuff, or even longer in some areas. So we really wanted to take this year and focus on that's the biggest thing, right? And so we wanted to focus on that, which doesn't mean that there won't be some announcements in the future and that kind of thing, but nothing I can. It's funny when people ask me this stuff because it's like, I wish I could say this, but here we are. So,
Well, is there anything that you're nerding out about today?
um, well. Unfortunately, my schedule in the last couple of days has been I was traveling for 9 days. I did that like conference and then I went to the Midwest and visited stores and stuff. So my nerding out has been catching up on emails, which is very exciting. But I'm really excited to dive deep into some of the numbers with those feeding studies I was talking about so we can actually like do some videos, put some of that data out there just to get people thinking about it. We've been trying to do more videos where we just talk about like concepts like that we're doing to get people to kind of just like think about green juju, but also just think about nutrition in general.
Nice.
Well, we're excited. We're here for it.
Well, I will for sure, let you guys know if something comes up. So.
Appreciate it. Well, Billy, thanks for joining us again.
Of course, I'm honored that I was your first guest and your 101st.
Yes.
So I will take either of those things. I'm super excited. And I know it's kind of funny to say this because like it'll be on a podcast later and SuperZoo will be over and all that and people will be listening to this, but we are having some special guests at our booth. So Wednesday, the two crazy cat ladies are coming by to talk about cats and green juju, and then Dr. Katie Kangas and Rita Hogan are going to come on Wednesday or Thursday. So
Nice.
feel free to come and hang out and ask the people who really know about stuff questions.
Well, that's really cool. I'm excited to know that you guys are working with two crazy cat ladies because, my cat loves the rabbit. I mean, I don't feed it to him all the time. He mostly has pork, but then I'll switch it up and add rabbit, and he just gets so excited. Yeah, he's old.
Yeah, one of their cats, doesn't matter what they're eating, they have to have bison green sprinkled on top or they will not eat. So like they give me a lot of crap about it not being labeled for cats, but they're kind enough to. I just think they're the most positive, like incredible people. Like every time you talk to them, they make you feel like you're the most special person on earth.
I know, right? They're so excited to see you and talk to you, and they want to know what you've been up to. They are just so amazing.
Exactly. And so for us to be able to have them at the booth and to be able to, and the other thing too is we started a vet program this year. So we have over 80 vets in our program. The goal is to get 100 by the end of the year. And like Dr. Katie Kangas is in our vet program, and we're providing some of those vets with treats to go in treat jars in their practices and things like
nice.
that, and doing trainings and connecting them with retailers. But it's always nice when we can get someone who's in our vet program to be at the booth and talking to people about specific issues and stuff. So
I'm excited. Well, yes, Kimberly and I will report back after SuperZoo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right.